Hi everyone, welcome back in my YouTube channel. So today I'm going to explain a Spring Boot security internal flow. So how a Spring Boot security working as a internally. So if you know this concept, so if you're going to attend any interview, that time you will what give the answer very what effectively. Or once if you get a chance to work with your implementation in your project, that time if you know all the basic things, so your implementation becomes very easy. So confidently you can implement what the Spring Boot security in your project. That's why I'm going to explain today all the basic internal things, how a Spring Boot internally works. Okay, so that's why guys, first we should know what all the components are there inside a Spring Boot security, right? So we can see here guys, so we have what authentication filters are there, security context are there, authentication manager are there, authentication providers and user service details and password encoder. So these all are the component guys. These all are the component which will be which are working inside the what Spring Boot security. Correct guys? So we'll explain one by one because I've already mentioned here step number 1 to step number 10. So how each and every component internally it's working, right? So first step, right, we can see here. So means what? So the very first step that will happen what when anyone call API through the browser or any API consumer way. So with their credential, right? With their credential in the sense their username and password, right? Once they're going to log in with the username and password, then they're going to click sign in button, right? So that is the first point, guys. That is the first point. Okay. So what I mentioned, they will call from API through browser or any API consumer way with their credential. So a authentication filter which is present what under a Spring security framework. We can see here, right? So once you're going to send request, it will reach to the what authentication filter. So what is authentication filter? So authentication filter which is present under a Spring security framework guide will be intercepting. What it does, it intercepting the request. But once it intercept the request, it will try to convert whatever what authentication details receiving from the user. Yes or no? So whatever the authentication details receiving from the user, like what username and password, into a authentication object, into a authentication object. This authentication object is the what base. Authentication object is the base guide where all the validation of user credential will be validated. What I mentioned. So what authentication object, this authentication object is the base, right, where all the validation of user credential will be validated. We know very well, right? So what is authentication and what is authorization? Already I have discussed last video, right? So authentication means, guys, in very simple terms, what it is, what verifying or identifying the user credential, right? And authorization means they're going to authorize their what authorities and role, correct? So what we can say here, so once what once they got the what receiving for the once they get the what username and password, so what it will do, so after getting the username and password into a authentication object, this authentication object is a base where all the validation of the user credential will be validated, right? In further steps, guys, once the authentication object is built, once the authentication object is built, the request will be passed to authentication manager. What I mentioned, once the authentication object is built, then this request will be redirected to the authentication manager. Okay, so we noticed point number 3, step number 3. So authentication manager is the place, guys. Just guys listen carefully what I'm going to explain. So authentication manager is the place where what? Where it will identify, where it will identify what is the correspondent, what is the correspondent authentication provider. What it will does, guys? So authentication manager is the place where it will identify what is the correspondent authentication provider that my request has to go, that my request has to go. Like, right, like if we may have lot lot many processes, lots of processes are there. What the process, guys? Where we can validate or user credential. Like you may use DB to validate your credential, guys. Suppose if you may use DB to validate user credential, or you may use through what? JWT token, or you may use LDAP server, or you may use Auth. So there can be many possible provider, right? So they can have what? Many possible provider that your system may have, right? Because you're going to check, right? You're going to check the validation, right? With the help of DB, with the help of JWT token, you may check with the LDAP, OAuth. Yes or no? These are different types of validated what platforms. These are different types of validation platforms are there. So they can many possible provider that your system may have. So authentication manager is the place where it will identify what is the most appropriate authentication provider that my request has to be sent, that my request has to be sent. Once authentication provider, guys, once authentication provider received the request, when authentication provider received the request, this is the place, guys. What? Authentication provider. So this is the place where all your business logic will be implemented, where all what? Business logic will be what? Implemented. When, yes or no? All the business logic will be implemented, guys. So when we say business logic means, guys, the logic related to your security. The logic means, guys, related to your security only. So how do like validate username and password? There can be what? Scenario where you may receive email ID as user, or then can be some scenario where you can receive what? Mobile number as username and password. So based upon all such scenario, guys, you will implement all your logic of security validation, right, inside your authentication provider. Yes or no, guys? I hope you understood. Great. So an authentication provider in turns, guys, will use two other interfaces. What? Authentication provider, what? In turns will use two other interfaces. First is what? User detail service, which is point number 5th, and what? Password encoder, point number 6. That is 5 and 6, right? So guys, what is user detail service? So user detail service is an interface, guys. User detail service is an interface which holds user schema, like how my what? User details should looks like, how my user details looks like. That might be what? Scenario where my user will have what? Username, password, OTP, all the schema, guy, all the schema I will identify under what? My user and user detail service. Correct? And password encoder is the guy also it is interface. The password encoder is also a interface, which will tell, right, which will tell how my password has to be encrypted, encoded, and decrypted while validating. While validating, so these all the things how they are going to perform. So what? So how my password has to be encrypted, what, encoded, and decrypted, what, while validating, right? So the security provides it. The security provides many passwords at encoders, which will be seen in coming yes or no section. So decrypt password, right? Decrypt password encoder, no password encoder in the what scenario where we don't want what, where we don't want our password to be what encoded or encrypted or what encrypted, right? Or possible password encoder are available, right? So or possible password encoder are available in spring security, which will be seen in what coming section, guys. Once authentication provider, once authentication provider using what user details services and password encoder validated whether input, whether input what initials are valid or not, flow will be what given to authentication manager, correct? Flow to authentication filter, correct? So guys, now my authentication object, now my authentication object which I what initially sent from my filter will hold what, whether the user is valid, authenticate user, or what are the authorities, what are the roles associated to it, yes or no, in my authentication object, correct? Once my authentication filter, guys, once my authentication filter received what my authentication object, once authentication filter received my what authentication object, which is what populated from what authentication provider, authentication manager, which we can see in what step number 8. This authentication filter, guy, pass the authentication object to the what security context, which is step 9, correct? Where my details will be stored inside the container. Whatever we get response from the what authentication manager to the authentic filter, and it will store into the security context. So security context is the place where we save the data of the user once what once it authenticated, once it authenticated themselves. It might be valid user or not. These such details are stored in what security context only and given back to the browser. Step number 10, correct, guys? So from second time set, from second times onwards, you are going to see in request, if they are trying to pass same security information, all this flow will not get executed, guys, because we already try to validate that what person using that credential entered, and spring security will tell, right, tell you what using this, using this token, whenever I am receiving from second times onward, this is the valid token or not. So this is the how spring security, guys, internally flow up in our scenario. So that is, guys, basic. So how spring security internally they are going to execute, correct, guys? So that's it, guys, in this video. So we understood how we are going to send request to the authentication filter, and at last how we are going to save our response into a security context, and same thing we are going to redirect to the respective user guide. So that's, guys, in this video. So what I thought, so if you know clearly what Spring security internal flow, so your implementation becomes very easy, guys. Okay, guys, thank you. If you like this video, please like, subscribe, and share among your friends. Thank you, guys. Bye bye. We'll see you in next video.